Welcome back to All About Winning Daily Fantasy Sports. My name is Ty Patton. In this video, I'm going to share my research and strategy for the wide receiver position in Week 6 of the NFL. Just a couple of reminders. I build lineups primarily for the main slate, which means I exclude the primetime games, these Thursday night, Sunday night, and Monday night games. And in this weekend in particular, there's another game. Sunday morning, Tampa Bay, Carolina is being played in England, and it's actually going to be played at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So keep that in mind. It's not on the main slate. And if you are involved in a season-long team, remember that as well. In case you have those players, you definitely want to make sure McCaffrey's in your lineup. I do the showdown videos for Thursday night and Monday night. And by week 8, I plan on implementing the a video for Sunday night as well. So without further ado, let's get started. And the first thing I want to do is take a look back at the wide receiver position in week 5. In week 5, the top 5 projected wide receivers were Julio Jones, Mike Evans, DeAndre Hopkins, Michael Thomas, and Keenan Allen. Recency bias affected the projections. It does every week, but just an added note. The actual top 5 scoring were Fuller from Houston with 56.70 points. He was also the top scoring player in fantasy last week. Number 2 was Michael Thomas from New Orleans, 44.20 points. 3 was Amari Cooper, 42.60 points. Jacksonville's DJ Chark with 39.40 points. And Minnesota's Adam Thielen scored 35 points. Once again, the wide receiver position proved to be elusive at best, with only Michael Thomas projecting and actually finishing in the top 5. Hopkins actually finished number 15 overall with 15.80 points. The rest of the top 5 projected all finished outside the top 40. The actual top 5 combined had 51 total receptions on 62 targets, and they scored a total of 217.90 fantasy points. And I can break that down further. That comes out to 43.58 points average for each one. Last week was one of the highest scoring fantasy weeks I've seen. So 43.58 points average for the top 5 wide receivers on 10.2 receptions on 12.4 targets. Or if you want to break it down even further, that's 3.52 points per target, which is, if you watch my previous videos, you know that number is extremely high. And I'll show you that in comparison to what the numbers tell us through the first 5 weeks. Now let's look at the top targeted wide receivers through the first 5 weeks. And before I go through all these numbers, I want to say, I know I throw a lot of numbers at you. I don't expect you to try to write them down. As I pick my player pool on each video, I go back and I tell you why, and I reference these numbers that I'm giving you. So these are just the numbers that I use to select my particular player pool. So these are the top targeted wide receivers through the first 5 weeks. Number 1, Cooper Kupp. He's received 63 total targets, which is 12.6 per game. Number 2 is Michael Thomas. He's received 55 targets for 11 targets per game. Number 3, Tyler Boyd from Cincinnati. 53 total targets, 10.6 targets per game. Number 4, Robert Woods from the Rams. 47 targets, 9.4 a game. So Kupp and Woods are in the top 4, and they're on the same team. Number 5, DeAndre Hopkins, 44 total targets, which is 8.8 a game. Number 6, Larry Fitzgerald, also with 44 targets, 8.8 a game. And Julio Jones with 44 targets, 8.8 a game. These top 7 have scored a combined 670 points on a total of 350 targets, or 1.91 points per target. So Remember when I said that last week was a really abnormal scoring week? That the top five last week averaged 3.52 points per target, but the overall average through the first 5 weeks is 1.91 points per target. It's not receptions, that's targets, and it's important to remember that. Now let's look at the top scoring wide receivers, fantasy points wise. Then this is through the first 5 weeks, and remember, this is all things being relevant: touchdowns, yards, fumbles, receptions. And on Draftkings, you get a full point on receptions, so keep that in mind. Number one scoring, Cooper Kupp, 25.6 per game. Number two, Michael Thomas, 24.7 per game. Those are the top two targeted wide receivers. So just makes sense that they'd be the top two scoring wide receivers. Number three, Amari Cooper with 23.8 fantasy points per game. Number four, DJ Chark with 22.3 points per game. Number five, Michael Gallup, 22 points per game. And remember, he's only played 3 games. He's been out a couple with an injury. Number six is Julio Jones with 18.4 points per game. And number seven, Tyler Boyd with 18 points per game. There's definitely a correlation between the top targeted and the top scoring. Kupp, Thomas, Boyd, and Julio are all in the top targeted and in the top 7 scoring. Another thing that I consider is not only targeted, but snap percentage. Are they on the field for most of their team's plays? These are the wide receivers who have the largest snap percentage. The Jets, Robbie Anderson has had 98% of his team snaps. Houston's DeAndre Hopkins, 97%. The Rams, Robert Woods, 97%. Houston's Will Fuller, 96%. And Cleveland's Odell Beckham Jr., 96%. Kupp and Lockett each have 94% snap percentage, and Thomas, Thielen, Kirk, Landry, and Crowder all have 93%. Those are the wide receivers that are on the field the most. I just wanted to add this in real quick. I don't normally throw this out there, but the top catch percentage, Michael Thomas leads the way. He's catching 82% of the passes thrown at him. Mohamed Sanu from Atlanta is 81%, and Paul Richardson from Washington 77%. Total air yards is another category. This tells you the total number of route yards and completion yards combined, what they average. Just because they might not have the ball thrown to them, it tells you if they're running routes. Leading the way is Washington's McLaurin. He's averaging 122.8 air yards. Remember, that's completion yards and route yards. Parker from Miami, 121.8 route yards per game. Air yards per game, I'm sorry. Julio Jones, 114.6 air yards per game. Dallas's Michael Gallup, 3 games, 110 yards. Will Fuller, 108.4 air yards per game. And Baltimore's Marquise Brown with 107.8 air yards per game. Chark from Jacksonville has 107.2 yards. Hopkins from Houston, 105.2 yards. Beckham from Cleveland, 103.6 yards. And Cooper, rounding out the top 10, has 103 air yards per game. Finding a correlation between all these numbers is key to identifying a strong wide receiver pool. It's very volatile week in and week out. Projections are not, or the scoring is not catching up with the projections, and this is evident in the first 5 weeks. So using these numbers to identify does give you an advantage. One thing to really consider in addition to all this is matchups. I feel like matchups are right underneath touches as far as importance for weeding out the wide receiver position. The following wide receivers have the best matchups in week 6. These are the teams that are giving up the most points to the wide receiver position. And number 30 is Atlanta. They're allowing 46.5 points per game to the wide receiver position. This week they're facing Arizona and Larry Fitzgerald. Not sure if Christian Kirk's going to be playing, but the main receiver there is Fitzgerald. And Keyshawn Johnson. If Kirk can't go, Johnson will be out there as well. Number 29 is Washington. They are allowing 45.8 points per game. This week they're going to play Miami. Miami's main receivers are Devontae Parker and Preston Williams. Number 28 is Philadelphia. They're giving up 45.7 points per game. This week they're going to face Minnesota, and the main targets there obviously are Thielen and Diggs. Number 27 is Houston. They're giving up 43.3 points per game. This week, Kansas City. Watkins still has a. Let's look here real quick. I was just looking over the injury report. Watkins still has a questionable mark, and I'm going to lean towards him probably not playing this week, but keep an eye on it, obviously. Tyreek Hill's a question mark, and he's been practicing, so keep an eye on that. And Tyreek Hill coming back could be huge for Kansas City this week. And Houston is, like I said, giving up 43.3 points per game. Mahomes and if Watkins and Hill aren't playing, you still have Robinson, Harden, and the kid Pringle last week really had a good game against Indianapolis. Number 26 is New Orleans. They're giving up 43 points per game. This week they're going to be facing Jacksonville, DJ Chark, and D.D. Westbrook. And number 24 is Baltimore. They're giving up 40.2 points per game. This week they're going to be taking on Cincinnati and Tyler Boyd and Alden Tate. Cincinnati's pretty beat up at the wide receiver position. Now, likewise, when you consider the worst, you also got to look at the best. I mean, if it's a decision between a couple receivers, you might want to, if they have a worse matchup, you might want to take this into consideration too. Number 1 is Dallas. They're allowing 25.8 points per game to the wide receiver. This week they're facing off against Jets, Anderson, and Crowder. I'm a Dallas fan, and I just want to add this into the reason they're not giving up many points passing is because they're just getting shredded by the run game. And that's the case for a few of these other teams as well. Number 2 is Denver. They're allowing 26 points per game to the wide receiver position. This week they get Tennessee's Corey Davis and A.J. Brown. They're another team that's given up a lot of points to the running back position. So you don't have to, if you can run the ball and you don't have to pass, that's what teams are going to do. Number 3, Cincinnati, the absolute worst against the run. They're giving up 29.5 points per game to the pass. This week they're going to be facing Baltimore's Marquise Henderson and Willie Snead. Cleveland's number 4. They allow 30.1 points per game to the wide receiver. This week they get Seattle's Tyler Lockett and DJ Metcalf. Number 5, Kansas City. They're only allowing 30.6 points per game to the wide receiver. This week they're going to be facing Houston's Will Fuller and DeAndre Hopkins. That's going to be a very interesting game. It also has the highest total on the board. Not ironically, but these teams in comparison, as I mentioned, give up a lot of points to the defense or to the offense's rushing games. Because touchdowns are so volatile, I also want to mention wide receivers who lead the way with red zone targets. It's not something that you can consider week in and week out, but looking at the wide receivers that are targeted the most can give you an edge when you're building your lineups. The number 1 wide receiver right now, target-wise inside the red zone, is Emmanuel Sanders. He's received 8 targets inside the red zone. 5 of those being inside the 10. Remember, the red zone's anywhere inside the 20. Seattle, DJ Metcalf has received 7 targets inside the red zone. 1 of those was inside the 10. And he's had a total of 7 targets. He's not had any receptions, but he is getting targeted. So number 3 is Larry Fitzgerald. He's had 7 inside the 20. All 7 have been inside the 10-yard line. Baltimore's Henderson has received 6 red zone targets. 3 of those have been inside the 10. Cooper Kupp for the Rams has received 6 red zone targets. 3 of his has been inside the 10. Cortland Sutton for Denver, who's number 6. He's received 6 red zone targets, 3 inside the 10. Washington's McLaurin, number 7. He's received 6 targets inside the red zone. 4 of the 6 have been inside the 10. And Cincinnati's Alden Tate has received 6 red zone targets, 2 of those being inside the 10. So take a deep breath. I'm going to put this all together for you and give you the wide receivers that I'm targeting and why. And remember, I'll be using all the numbers that I just threw out there to you as a reference. These aren't necessarily in any particular order, but when I do my lineup video on Friday, these players will be in my lineup builds. Michael Thomas, he's $7,800. He's getting 11 targets per game. He's averaging 24.7 fantasy points per game. He's number 1 in catch percentage. He could be a pivot off of Kamara. If a lot of people are going to take Alvin Kamara this week because of what McCaffrey did to Jacksonville, perhaps pivoting to Thomas would be the right way to go in this game. Number 2, Tyler Boyd, $6,300. He's getting 10.6 targets per game. He's averaging 18 fantasy points per game. Baltimore's given up 40.2 points per game to the wide receiver. You could stack him with Dalton. And again, he's only $6,300. Nice spin down from those more expensive wide receivers. Number 3, DeAndre Hopkins. He's $7,400. He's getting 8.8 targets per game, 97% snap percentage, 105.2 total air yards. And he could be contrarian to Fuller based on recency bias because Fuller had that huge 56-point fantasy game last week. A lot of people are under the impression that that Kansas City gives up a lot of points to the passing game. So recency bias could cause people to go back to Will Fuller, causing the DeAndre Hopkins ownership to go down. So he could actually be a contrarian leverage play as one of the top wide receivers in the NFL. Number 4, Larry Fitzgerald, $6,100. He's getting 8.8 targets per game. Atlanta's the worst at giving up 46.5 points, fantasy points per game to the wide receiver. He could be a pivot off the higher ownership going to other wide receivers. This game has a 51-point game total, and he's received 7 red zone targets, all 7 inside the 10. Number 5, Julio Jones. He's 8.8 targets a game. He's scoring 18.4 fantasy points a game. He's number 3 in air yards with 114.6 air yards per game. He's another one that could be contrarian. So spending up at wide receiver could possibly be contrarian this week. Might not be as high on him this week, but Matt Ryan is throwing the ball around a lot, and this could be the Julio Jones week. He's 8,000. He's actually at the top, and he does have a questionable tag, but he's been pretty consistent as far as playing in games. They didn't lead on in the injury report as if it was something to really worry about. I'll take another look here real quick. Jones was held off Wednesday's practice due to a hip injury. He's had little issue playing through health concerns and producing during his career. In fact, he hasn't missed a contest since Week 15 of the 2016 season. Nonetheless, his status will be monitored closely as the week proceeds to learn whether a DNP is possible Sunday at Arizona. So just keep an eye on that if you're building your lineups. Always look at the injury report on Sunday at 11:30. A zero will pretty much eliminate you in any contest you're playing. Number 6, Cooper Kupp, $7,100. I'm not really crazy about the matchup, the game script. San Francisco's been pretty tough against the pass, but he's averaging the most targets per game out of all the wide receivers at 12.6 per game. He's also the highest scoring wide receiver at 25.6 points per game. He's got 94% snap percentage, and the game total in this game is 50.5 points between the two teams. So you have to consider Kupp. Me personally, if I'm going to spend 7,100, I'm probably going to try to go up 300 more and get to DeAndre Hopkins, or up 900 more to Julio Jones. Number 7, 2 wide receivers from the same game. Thielen, who's 6,700, and Diggs is 5,900. Philly's giving up 45.7 points per game. Thielen has a 93% snap percentage. Philly shuts down the run pretty consistently. These two could be leverage play off of ownership for other receivers, so that's something you definitely want to watch is ownership, and I'll be mentioning that in my lineup building video. But these two could be 2 sleeper picks because if Philly shuts down Cook, other than they do bleed points to the running back coming out of the backfield pass wise. But Thielen and Diggs could be Diggs at 5,900 is really nice value, and Thielen, he was the number 5 total scoring wide receiver last week. Diggs might be a nice pivot off of him in week 6. Number 8, 2 more receivers from Kansas City. Robinson at 5,900 and Watkins at 6,200. And remember, watch Watkins. As I mentioned, let's take another look. I think anything has changed. Houston's 29 against the pass. Watkins didn't practice Wednesday. Watkins picked up a hamstring injury early in the first quarter of the Week 5 loss to the Colts and wasn't able to return to the contest. Given the tricky nature of hamstring injuries, Watkins doesn't have a clear timeline to return, but he probably won't be an option for the Week 6 matchup with the Texans if he isn't able to practice in any fashion. With Tyreek's shoulder availability just for Sunday's game also in question, the Chiefs could be forced to turn to Demarcus Robinson, Mecole Hardman, and Byron Pringle. So, me personally, especially hamstring injuries, I tend to stay away from those players that are coming off those injuries because one little tweak, first play of the game, Watkins actually was suited up and had the okay to play in this last game coming off of another injury against Indianapolis, and I believe he played 1 or 2 plays and he was done for the night. So you get a nice big fat 0 when that happens. Other notable matchups that I really like for wide receivers is Jacksonville's DJ Chark and Dede Westbrook. New Orleans is allowing 43 points per game. These two could be a nice value sleeper picks. And Washington's McLaurin, I like him a lot in this Washington-Miami game this week. With Keenum back, McLaurin's averaging 122.8 air yards, the most. Miami's giving up points to the wide receiver. I think the individual matchup with Xavier could be a concern, but I do like McLaurin this week. He's had 6 red zone targets as well. So summing it up, these are the wide receivers I'm going to be targeting in Week 6. Thomas from New Orleans, Boyd from Cincinnati, Hopkins from Houston, Fitzgerald from Arizona, Julio Jones from Atlanta, Cooper Kupp from the Rams, Thielen and Diggs from Minnesota, Robinson from Kansas City, Chark and Westbrook from Jacksonville, and McLaren from Washington. Targets, matchups are very important, as well as looking at the game totals. The winning lineups in the past two Millie Makers had 4-player game stacks from the second highest total on the board. The highest total games this week, again, are Houston at Kansas City. Kansas City, 5-point favorite, 54.5-point game total. Atlanta at Arizona, 52-point game total. Atlanta's a 2.5-point favorite. And San Fran at the Rams has a 50-point game total, with the Rams a 3.5-point home favorite. I'd like to thank you for joining me. I will be posting my next video, tight end, defensive special teams, real soon today. And I'm going to try to get out the Thursday night football showdown video as well. Kind of want to make sure I know what the weather is going to do before I dig any deeper into that. And I want to thank the people who are reaching out with comments and questions and their opinions. I really appreciate it. I hope to expand this channel, and I encourage you to reach out and communicate and help me build this channel. Please hit the subscribe button, and that notification bell so you're notified when my next video posts. This is all about winning daily fantasy sports. My name is Ty Patton, and I'll see you real soon.